Each generation before us has responded to the Great Commission in their day, but today is our day. How will you do your part to pray, give, go, and send? My name is D. Ray Davis, and I work with a team of church mobilization strategists at the IMB. In September 2001, we were reeling from what had happened on 9/11. By October, we quickly moved from reeling to investigating. We were asking questions like, how could this possibly happen to us? We wanted answers. There were panels, there were inquisitions. One day, I was walking by a TV and I saw Colin Powell being questioned. I paused to listen in for a moment. During one of his answers, Colin Powell tried to give some context, and what he said changed my way of thinking about our task. He said, what we had on 9/11 was a failure of imagination. We never planned for this because we never imagined it. And I remember thinking to myself, that's me. I have a failure of imagination in my work, and that's our missionaries. We fail to imagine a church's place in the task. Further, that's our churches. We all have a failure of imagination. We tend to outsource the mission. There are so many things we've never planned to do together, I contend, because we've never imagined them. It's time for us, all of us, to imagine anew, to reimagine, in essence, what a response to the Great Commission looks like in our day. Ephesians 3:20 reminds us that he is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think or imagine, according to the power at work within us. As a start, we need to understand our times and overcome our failure of imagination and do our part. In 1 Chronicles 12, David needed sons of Issachar to help him understand the times to know what Israel should do. So let's start by understanding our times. Modern missions is generally acknowledged as having begun in 1792. William Carey wrote in his Inquiry into Our Obligation, and he said, do not the goodness of the cause loudly call upon us to venture all and use every warrantable exertion for their benefit. He zealously shared his conviction that the church needed to awaken and do all it could to use every warrantable exertion for the sake of the lost. Many missionaries today hear objections to their going from within their church even, and they're not alone. William Carey was opposed. He was zealous, but he was opposed. One older Baptist leader stood to confront Carey and told him to sit down and be quiet. God, this man said, could save the heathen without him. However, there are some valid objections to our going in that day. 1792, you just couldn't travel like you can today. So as I read through Carey's inquiry, I was overwhelmed by this historical nugget from 1792. He said, whatever objections might have been made before the invention of the mariner's compass, nothing can be alleged for it. Seems in a manner to invite us to the trial. So forgive me for geeking out on history. I'm not really a history nut, but do you see what's happening here? Do you grasp what he is saying? This is gold to me. The compass removed a primary obstacle and it opened up the first era of modern missions that we call to the coastlands. Carey said basically, we have ships and now we have a compass. I contend that William Carey understood the Great Commission and he understood his times. He recognized providence seems in a manner to invite us to this trial. The first era ends in 1910, but during that era, those who were serving on the coastlands began to look inland, and a new era, to the interior era, began in 1865. It was about 1853, David Livingstone looked inland and he saw across Africa by the light of the morning sun, the smoke of 1,000 villages where no missionary had ever been. And he asked a very important uh, question that is actually, it is just so convicting to me. He said, can the love of Christ not carry the missionary where the slave trade carries the trader? I shall open up a path to the interior or perish. Again, powerful and very convicting that the church had not kept up by going inland as quickly even as the slave trade. Well, add to Livingston's voice our own Lottie Moon's words. In 1887, she said, the time seems right for our mission to emulate the example of others and push on into the interior. I contend David Livingston and Lottie Moon understood their times. And in their day, the church moved to the interior from 1865 to 1980. In 1934, though, during the To the Interior era, new insights began to emerge. It wasn't enough to be on the coastlands or in the inlands. In those places, coastlands and inlands, were diverse people groups, diverse languages, diverse cultures, and diverse worldviews. So fast forward to 1974. In 1974, this To the Every People group era crystallized when Ralph Winter addressed the Lausanne Conference saying, the imperative of the Great Commission extended to every people group, not just every modern country. Contemporary leaders would continue to help us acknowledge the vast diversity on coastlands, in inlands, and among all nations. So we have what we have called the To Every People group era. This historical overview is generally accepted by missiologists. These three eras are addressed in missiology books, articles, and seminary courses. So I want to go on record at this point and be perfectly clear. We in the mission world continue our work on the coastlands. We continue our work in the interiors, and we continue to do our work focused upon specific people groups. These eras represent what I would call the primary forte or focus or the impetus of a particular period. But I believe we may be in a new fourth era. But the focus of this new era is not where we go, coastlands or interior, or to whom we go, people groups. We continue to do all of that. But this new era is about how in our day, we all can be more involved. Every disciple in every church can play a part. So to understand our times, we need to acknowledge that mission has always been over there and only for a few. Our part was to support and we would pray and give. We would support those who went. Both are good and both are still needed, praying and giving. I like this quote by Peterson, Ashleman, and Sneed. In its well-intended efforts to tackle the Great Commission task, the church has often birthed structures limiting involvement. Yet the Great Commission applies to all disciples everywhere. My own pastor in Richmond, Virginia, Cliff Jordan, has said, the Great Commission is too important to leave only to a class of professional sent ones. But in order to overcome our failure of imagination, we need to consider the times and know what part we can play and what part we should play. Let me say it like this. Carey responded to a compass in 1792. We need to respond in 2020 and beyond to what we have at our disposal. Again, to use every warrantable exertion for the benefit of the world's people. Herb Caen has said, we may be entering a new era when missionary work will not be left to professional sent ones alone, missionaries alone. I share this historical overview to help us understand the unique times in which we live, and we need to consider what part each of us can play in this new day. Now, to be fair, Every disciple in each generation has lived and served at a unique time in history. But in our day, Andy Johnson has written, just because an actor doesn't occupy the starring role on God's missionary stage doesn't mean he or she has no valuable part to play. I would go so far as to say that the church, all of us in the church, need to do our part or we'll never get the Great Commission done. So, the question that I'd like to pose, could it be that God intends for us to overcome our failure of imagination, believe Him for what He wants to do, and do it far more abundantly than we've ever imagined? Could it be that we are in a new day and we need to understand our times and be ready to do our part in this new day? One writer has observed throughout time, churches have approached the Great Commission in three distinct paradigms. In the first paradigm, the church has been passive but supportive. Missionaries do mission work, the church supports them. This writer wrote, churches assumed the important but largely passive role of serving as the primary source for personnel and funds. In the second paradigm, the church is also supportive but proactive in the discipling of a new generation of missionaries and sending them out. He says the church is now in the driver's seat, even to the point of establishing its own mission initiatives. The third paradigm is different. The church has a mission DNA. This paradigm, he continues, seems to embrace everything that our Lord envisioned for his church. What he is describing is what we call a fully mobilized church. Members in these churches understand the times and know how to do their part. Missionary sending is only one outcome. Others are praying, giving, going in partnership to the field. At the IMB, we use this as to describe churches that inspire and equip their members to pray, give, go, and send. Take note of this. This is very important. The first two paradigms are missionary centric. They revolve around the missionary. But the third paradigm is church centric. Healthy churches inspire and equip their people to pray, give, go, and send. Often our mobilization team will sit down for discussions with church members and they've heard about sending and they ask us, how can we be a sending church? We want to aspire to be a church that sends missionaries. But again, sending is one outcome for a fully mobilized church. So if you want to be a sending church, you need to begin inspiring all of your people. Preach God's glory among the nations. Tell stories of what God is doing in our day. Further, you need to have a plan to equip your people, disciple and train toward full mobilization. Other specific training about a focal people group that you're working in or a place that you're going to is also very important. You need, as a church, to inspire and equip people to pray. G. Campbell Morgan says, prayer is no slight, spasmodic process. You have to inspire and equip people, and you need to plan to lead your people to pray. You also need to inspire and equip the people in your churches to give. Churches will rally around the cooperative program and Lottie Moon Christmas offering or any global mission offering that you're involved in if they are led to do so. Inspire them and equip them to do it. Next, you need to inspire and equip people to go. Short-term going bolsters all long-term efforts. It supports the missionary on the field, and it inspires a new generation to consider going. Again, if people are inspired and equipped, and they pray, give, and go, you won't be able to stop sending midterm or long-term workers. because mission is the identity of the church and not simply an activity of the church. But here's an important question. If we are inspiring and equipping our people to pray, give, go, and send, what is it actually that we're inspiring and equipping them to pray, give, go, and send to do? Everything is not mission. And if you think that everything is mission, then really nothing is mission. I was in Chicago, uh, Illinois, at Uptown Baptist Church, gathered around a table with Pastor Michael Allen and his mission committee. After lunch, he focused in on his main question. He motioned to the rest of his team around the table and he asked me a question. He said, how can we best work with our missionary partner in Tanzania? What can we do that will best help them? Well, I thought about it and I stood up and went over to a whiteboard and I wrote out what we call the missionary task. I wrote it out step by step across the whiteboard. Entry, evangelism, discipleship, church formation, leadership development, exit. Because I went on to explain, we enter people groups. We have to research, we have to learn language, we have to gain access, and then we have to open our mouths and evangelize. When we have believers, we begin to disciple them. If we have disciples, we gather those disciples and we plant healthy churches. Within those churches, we have to identify leaders and we develop those leaders so that the church can thrive on its own and not depend on outside influence. And then finally, we exit to partner. We don't leave them, we don't abandon them, but we want them to stand on their own and partner with them as brothers and sisters in the task. I told Pastor Allen, I said, this is what your missionary partner is tasked to do. So I recommend to you guys as a church, look at the gifts and skills within Uptown, bring that to the missionary task, and then sit down with your partner in Tanzania and talk about the missionary task together. And I'll never forget, Pastor Allen leaned back, he lifted his hands over his head, and he said, this is the most helpful thing I've ever heard. And I remember I walked away from that meeting thinking, it's the missionary task. It's not just the missionary's task. The missionary task is the missionary task of the church. And let me be clear, I believe we will never accomplish the Great Commission. We will never accomplish the planting of churches in every people group unless the whole church steps up. This missionary task is a clear GPS-like guide that keeps our workers on task. And I'm finding that it's helping church leaders find clarity in our partnership as we address this task together. What we're coming to realize today is that the times have changed and we need to understand our times. We need to know our gifts. We need to recognize the Great Commission is for every believer in every church. We, each one of us, need to discover our part and join in and do the task together. Could it be so simple that the Creator, the Savior of the world, put in the body of Christ everything needed to accomplish what He desires to be done? If we are seeing churches lead their people by inspiring and equipping them to pray, give, go, and send, and we do it to the end that we as the church cooperatively enter people groups, evangelize, disciple, plant new churches, develop leaders, and exit to partnership, could it be that once we understand the times, we can seek to find our place, every one of us? Could it really be that God intends to use all of us? I believe so. I developed this tool to show how I believe in God's design, He intends to mobilize and integrate every believer into the missionary task of the church. In essence, every believer should understand the times and do their part. Are you gifted with skills that can aid missionaries in entering, like medical skills, or can you help with hunger relief? Can you start a business? Are you more gifted in leadership mentoring? Are you better equipped to help evangelize? Are you more relational? Are you a discipler? Are you a prayer warrior? Or are you a giver? Are you someone who can go and help alongside our teams? Are you a sender? Are you inspiring the next generation to understand the missionary task? Are you equipping, discipling people to know how to pray, how to give, how to go, how to send? Short term, midterm, and long term, all hands on deck. Imagine a day when believers in our churches understand the times and they step out and they fill the part they were intended to play. So I want to challenge each of you to understand the times in which we live. I want you to understand our day, and I challenge you to do your part. Will you inspire those in your network to do their part to enter, evangelize, disciple, etc.? Will you do your part to equip people? Will you mobilize people to pray? Praying prepares the way to enter people groups and to evangelize and disciple. Prayer undergirds church planting and the development of long-term leaders. Will you mobilize people to give? Giving impacts entry, evangelism, disciple making, church formation, and leadership development. Will you mobilize church members to use their gifts in this new day to go and help with entry, evangelism, discipleship, church planting, and leadership development? Will you mobilize a new generation of missionaries? We are in a new day. We need to recognize that He will do more than we can ever ask, think, or imagine. So I say, let's ask, let's think, and let's imagine by understanding the times and doing our part.